I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing very well.
So how are things?
Good. Crazy. I'm sure, like yourself, we're living in unprecedented times, and every day is a bit of an adventure.
How's the toll for the business overall, with this present situation?
It's obviously for at an individual level, for a lot of folks, working from home is a relatively new experience, and I think the transition, has gone well. I mean, I think we were well positioned in terms of technology with Teams and everything else, and being able to communicate. I think people have really grown, more comfortable with video. So
Mhm.
we do a lot more. I'll say video than certainly we did prior to the pandemic. From a business point of view outside, I mean, our customers are a bit of a mix. We have customers that have been more, I'll say, directly impacted by the nature of the products that they manufacture. Others have done fine. So, you can imagine if you're working from home, you buy laptops and displays. Maybe you don't run out and buy a new cell phone. And so we've seen a bit of implications among customers in terms of whether or not COVID was a game changer. I can't honestly say. I don't think anybody would tell you it's better. With the exception of maybe some of the communication providers. So, WebEx, Zoom, Teams, I'm sure their traffic and business is up. But by and large, I think, at best in these trying times, if you have status quo year over year, you're probably pretty happy.
Indeed, indeed. It's. I think it's the same story everywhere. Pretty much. Also here in the European region, we have a similar situation. We are sort of trying to get back to the normal, but it's hard, and people don't want to go back to the office because why would they want to do that? You know. So there are challenges, as such, which otherwise we didn't think it would sort of appear in this way. Yeah.
I was going to say, better to be in the businesses we are than, I would hate to be in, the travel and entertainment segment right now.
Oh, yeah. Every morning I hear stories that X amount of people were let go.
It's terrible.
And then yeah, it's terrible. Yeah.
It's terrible. I mean, and I think about all the service businesses that obviously just they don't have they don't have a demand. I mean, think about movie theaters and think about people who supplied movie theaters or clean movie theaters, and I don't know about you, but I can't imagine right now going into a movie theater.
No, definitely not, because we normally have vacation around April, right? So we had plans to go to Greece and enjoy our vacation as such, and by January we knew that we are not going there, so we had to cancel by January, and then we hoped that by July everything would be fine. But it looks like July of 2021 it would be eventually. So that's what I think it would be a bit of a normal by then.
Listen. I hope you're right, and a little bit earlier would be fine. But I know my daughter is supposed to get married in October, and she's pushed out now till next April. And even there, I mean, who knows
Yes.
what the world will be at that time.
No, I met my physician recently, and I asked him, like, when do you expect the vaccine to be, available to the public? And he said, Pramod, if you are lucky by 2021 December, you would get it, So
Um,
so that's the kind of timeline that we are hoping that they would be ready, So
Well, and I never thought about it. There was a really interesting article. There's I want to say 164 companies that are trying to develop a vaccine.
yeah.
And they said the thing that people don't realize, it's not just about getting a vaccine that's safe to market, but it's
Yeah.
also about, efficacy. And they said very likely the first vaccine out won't be the most effective.
No.
And, we're not even thinking about that. We're just thinking about a vaccine like in binary. We have it, we don't. And I'm like, wow, that's depressing.
Yes, that's the way we think in this technology space, right? So we only think in binary terms,
We do.
and so how did you get into this technology space?
I've always been in some form of technology. My background was engineering, and so you have a certain disposition, I think, towards science to begin with. But then, really obviously the whole proliferation of devices, computers, laptops, mobile devices, just fortunately, I do mean fortunately, I kind of fell into it, mostly on the digital space, mostly on software. Did a lot of work in AI. I know you guys read a lot about AI. I was one of the early architects for Watson, and spent 7 years focused on Watson and bringing it to market. And so really the power of data and data analytics and machine learning and all of the derivatives of that really showed me what was possible when you really apply technology in a way that can have a meaningful outcome. And the current business that I'm in is technology for certain. It takes a different form because it has a physical property. And with digital, it's fluid. It's fluid in terms of design and development and feature, and it's constantly changing. With the physical, less so. But what's different about physical is that you can apply it to so many different things. And so with digital, it's still purpose built. It has an intended user and outcome, and that's fine. With our product, I think it's fascinating that when you start to look at what we do. First thing I would tell you, it's probably not all that well understood. People don't really think about it until something happens, and we've all been there. That something happens when the phone slips out of the pocket and into the pond or the pool, or as I did, you get to the hot tub of your bathing suit, and the phone, is in your trunks, and pretty much we've all seen what happens. It's catastrophic. Mm-hmm. And things have gotten a little better, but by and large, not really, because electronics take a lot more forms. I mean, between personal devices like Bluetooth speakers and wearables and hearables, healthcare, huge changes in the healthcare environment. We've seen with the way in which something as simple as how do you monitor a diabetic's production of insulin, and these continuous glucose monitoring. It's a wearable, and it's subject to all of the things that we experience in life: sweat and rain and spills, and it's got to work. And then we get into autonomous driving, and before, our dependence on driving was on our own physical agility. We accelerated, we broke, we turned. With cars that can manage those aspects and much more, the electronic can't fail. If the electronic fails, bad things can happen. And of course, then the whole Internet of Things, the whole proliferation of devices in manufacturing. Devices out to the edge, and the idea of edge computing. So adding technology to, relatively traditional mechanical things, valves, pumps, motors. So we've seen electronics show up in places that we never designed, never intended them to be. And all of a sudden, there's really two things, if it were me, that you have to be concerned about. Security, because you typically don't want the device to be compromised. And durability. You don't want the device to fail. Well, most of the environments that we're pushing electronics into are challenging environments. And so, the technology that we work with, nano-coating type technologies, play an amazing part, I think, in the resilience of society to be able to function. So it may not be top of mind, it may not be as well understood as we'd like it to be, but it is critical to, I think, how we function.
Mm-hmm. And what does that do? Like when you are quoting that, what does that do to the device overall?
You have to actually design the coating with an intended purpose, meaning if it's simply to repel water, there's a number of different options and materials that you would likely deploy. And then to your question, you have to think about, depending on the material, it may in fact create a thermal issue. So if you put certain materials on electronic, because they're relatively thick, these would be more of the traditional, what they call conformal coatings. So like putting a bunch of silicon on top of a semiconductor tends to get hot. Well, heat and electronics don't go really well, especially if they're in a confined space. So you have to think about that. You have to think about what they would call the electrical property, the dielectric. So, is the coating going to be conductive? You typically don't want that to happen. You don't want it to carry current or a signal across the device. And the nice thing about, I think, this next generation of coatings, where we're really focused, what we call thin film, the characteristics of them really lend themselves in a way that align to the need. They're terrific products from a water protection, water repellent point of view. They can be resistant to the various gases and solvents. You think about automotive. You want it to resist things like petroleum products, gasoline, oil. They got to hold up to relatively harsh conditions in terms of temperature fluctuations. And so these thin films, depending on the material we choose, have terrific characteristics from an electrical, mechanical, thermal, and protective property. I think the key takeaway is it's not a simple one-size-fits-all type solution. It's actually matching the technology to the particular need.
So it means it has to be coated during the manufacturing process itself?
It does. And there are, everything that we do occurs during the manufacturing process. And for a number of reasons, I think the quality control and uniformity is best assured during that cycle. Number two, most of the work that we do tends to have relatively large scale associated. It's not ones and twos. It's literally hundreds of thousands and millions of pieces, and to be able to protect at that level of scale, it's best suited to do during the manufacturing cycle. There are organizations that have attempted to protect devices after the fact once they're shipped into the market. For obvious reasons, they don't have the scale. It's hard to maintain the consistency, within the technology. And so, they really have fallen, I think, far short of expectation, both at a consumer and a commercial level. So there's I'm not aware of any particular technologies that have done well in what we'll call the aftermarket from a protection point of view.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Makes sense. So as you are connecting, generally we are connecting a lot of devices to the internet, and bigger challenges is the security. How do you see the security being handled in the near future?
Yeah, well, to your point, the number today is around 125 new devices connected to the internet every second. It's an incredible, challenge just to keep up with the number of devices being connected. But when it comes to security, there's both the physical security and the digital, obviously the digital aspect. And the good news is, I think, based on our as a society, our familiarity with technology and the fact that technology is vulnerable to nefarious activities, to being hacked and compromised, and clearly you got to preempt and prevent those things from happening. I think certainly for the most recent past, we've seen manufacturers become much more diligent and incorporating safeguards. And data is now always encrypted. There's no back doors anymore typically to these type of devices. The devices themselves, in some cases, the authentication required, and often a two-step authentication required, prevents any type of independent, unauthorized type access. So I think societally we've gotten much better at securing these devices. Clearly, it will continue to be an important part of the design cycle, and it's going to be an important part of the operational cycle in terms of monitoring these types of devices. And this is why, worldwide there's these security operations centers, they call them SOCs, that have been established that continuously monitor devices that are connected to the internet and look for patterns. And the beautiful part about connected devices is they do one thing unilaterally, is they put out data. And data is able to tell a really important story, not only about the device itself. It can be situational, where the data is simply about the device and is it on or off, or location based, and maybe it's a sensor taking a temperature or a moisture reading. Yeah, but part of the data as well is its health, and whether or not from an operational and security point of view, it's performing, ideally as designed, or whether or not it's in fact been attacked. And, we've all heard about these denial of services and other forms. I think the big difference in those type of stories that you read and the general devices that get connected is that the general devices, IoT devices that get connected, are typically purpose-built. I mentioned a moment ago a sensor, and a sensor is probably the most common form of device being connected. And, very little value comes from hacking a sensor that's collecting, temperature data. Mm-hmm. So when you hear about these situations where, security's become a concern, typically it's around information that is of a personal nature, your name, your address, your driver's license number, etc. And so I think that, you still have to protect them, and I think OEMs are doing that, and I think they are doing a much better job at securing them. And I think they're a lot less interesting for, hackers to go after, to be candid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things that, we are quite sensitive here, whenever we talk about privacy or security, and especially to do with the data, GDPR, I'm sure you're aware of those, and that's where the question is coming from, because indeed, like at one side, IoT is providing you with a lot of informations, a lot of data that helps you to make smarter decisions. At the same time, you're also at the threat of being hacked and so forth. So, yeah.
But I do think that the bigger challenge when you look at it, when you look at IoT and you think about smart cities, you think about smart homes, things like cameras, doorbells, door locks. You think about Industry 4.0 and connecting robotics and other manufacturing apparatus, heavy equipment. You think about connected health, as we talked about a few minutes ago. You think about connected cars. I think the common theme through all of those, at least maybe it's a different way to think about protection, but it's really as HCO focuses on, it's the protection of the device itself in terms of its operational integrity. It's the durability. It's providing this protection so the electronic can survive. And you can only imagine going home and trying to access your front door with the smart lock, but it doesn't work. Why? Well, because the electronic wasn't coated and it corroded. And electronics typically do corrode if they're not going to be protected from the elements. You can imagine, what a camera that's outside, a security camera outside, for the public safety. It's only as good as long as it continues to record. But the minute the electronic becomes corroded, pitted, it ceases to function. It no longer serves a purpose. and I can't emphasize strongly enough. I think, I think about HCO, as somewhat as the guardian of the IoT. That's really what we do, and it's not, like, as I said, it's not kind of the household dinner topic or cocktail conversation until something happens. But McKinsey put out a report, and there's variations of this. Accenture had a similar report that talked about the economic impact of IoT, and roughly it's somewhere between $4 and $11 trillion by 2025. Mm-hmm. So imagine, right? This huge investment, and as a byproduct, it creates this incredible sub-economy. But that sub-economy is volatile. It's exposed if it's not being protected. And I'm amazed at our willingness to just accept status quo. And this is something where I think when we get more into mission critical, as planes are certainly dependent today on electronics and become more so as cars become autonomous, as health continues to proliferate and embrace IoT. And these things are all mission critical. These are things that arguably cannot fail. When my phone dies, it's frustrating and it's expensive, but I can accept. When my car errantly disengages the adaptive braking, that's a little bit scarier. So we're downwind from where we're going, and more of the things are becoming mission critical.
Mm-hmm. And you would have seen the evolution of IoT sector more closely than myself, I guess. How can you sort of see this into different phases? If you have to see, like, when it was started, let's say when people actually started connecting any devices to the internet, to where we are, like, how can you actually see this in different phases?
Yeah, I would tell you, it's almost where we were talking about earlier, is where I think the early phase, first the application was obvious. The cell phone. It was purely transparent. You understood that the minute you hit send, it created a connection, and inevitably, the laptop and other devices created a connection, and you could physically see it. And you go back to put it in perspective. Go back to 2015. There was about 15 billion connected devices at that time. But I think what we realize is that it doesn't necessarily have to take the form of that transparent, of that obvious type activity. So maybe that first generation was, inherently obvious. It was a type of things that it was binary. It was, I'm connected or I'm not connected. I think as we became comfortable with that, I think it morphed from more of the consumer type applications where we as individuals experienced, to our professional environments. We started to think about, well, what would be the benefit of connecting the things that I work with? Caterpillar is a great example, and connecting, heavy machinery. And, they started to do this. I mean, these are, big pieces, earth movers and backloaders, and these heavy pieces of equipment are really expensive, and often, they work in very remote areas. Well, what if you started to equip them with sensors? What if you started to connect those sensors so that you can continually monitor the health of that piece of equipment? What if you can anticipate when a particular piece of machinery is likely to fail? And I think, we got very comfortable because of our own personal experience with the Internet of Things, that we began to propagate ideas of how to move it into our professional worlds. And in the particular case of Caterpillar, I know they reported an uptick of 45% efficiency based on a connected piece of equipment. Think about agriculture. Never would have thought about it before. Never really dawned on me. But you start putting connected things into the soil that can report out on things like the soil moisture. all of a sudden crop management took on a whole new meaning. And, based on a lot of the learnings that have happened, there are, forecasts that by 2050, we could cut food costs in half, due to the efficiency, the productivity, due to the information. I mean, who doesn't want to make, a data-driven decision? Given the choice, go to your doctor, and your doctor, you say, doctor, what's wrong with me? He said, you want me to guess? If you say, no, absolutely not. I want you to use facts. I want you to use data, right, to determine why. Well, data-driven decisions are better decisions. And so I think, that first phase was the obvious, was the transparent. The second phase was the introduction of what we learned into our professional capacity. I think the third phase is scale. So we talked about 15 billion connected devices in 5 years ago, 2015, 41 billion connected devices by 2025. And by the way, that's I think a relatively conservative number. It's IDC's number. But you can see, the rate of adoption, the rate of proliferation. So this isn't a linear adoption curve. We're getting more and more and more comfortable with being connected. We're getting more comfortable with the data that's being generated. We're getting smarter about using that data. But again, that only happens if we protect the device from a security point of view, and we protect the device from a durability point of view.
And when I look at this present situation, as we briefly touched the subject about different industry, perhaps taking advantage of the situation, or let's say they are forced to sort of let the employee go, and then I see things like IoT, where there's a rapid advancement going on, and we also see artificial intelligence hooked up to that. What does that tell you about the job market overall going forward?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, because if you think back, society has gone through various disruptions. Industrial revolution, go back to the almost 100 years ago, and to the industrial age, and many of the studies I did in school, people were certainly concerned at the time about job disruption with the industrial age. Things would become automated. You wouldn't need workers. Well, actually, that didn't take place, right? In fact, new jobs were created with the introduction of equipment. When you look at really the introduction of computers, mid-50s, 1950s. Again, I think there was concern that we'd see massive job displacement. Computers would put us all out of work. Well, what happened is it definitely redefined, I think, certain job types, but it also created new roles. Data science, data miners, data managers, computer specialists, programmers, Java developers, C++ programmers. It gave way to new jobs. And so I think even in this next iteration, this next disruption, again, we're going to see, I think, some displacement, but I think we're going to see some net new type positions. We've certainly seen the growth of data science. Beyond traditional analytics, beyond what we knew in college about regression, and now we're moving into neural networks. We're moving into machine learning. We're moving into that next wave of science, and that will create new jobs, new opportunities. But it's still being written. It's not clear. I think clearly, I think with data, we have an opportunity to make better decisions. I think AI certainly holds the promise of helping us make sense out of the massive amounts of data that's being created. And certainly, I guess it's, at the end of the day, will all roles be the same when the dust settles? Of course not. But I think, it's the old adage, one door closes, another door opens. And I think we're seeing that.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to one of the founder the other day, and he said, like, he's also into the IoT space and intelligence and so forth. So he said that, Pramod, it's the biggest challenge that we will face forward is the scalability, and also resourcing, right? So you may find resources, but you may not find great resources to work in this extremely complex environment. And how do you match that? Like, how do you get there?
Yeah, it's true, but I don't know that that's a challenge that's unique to this generation.
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, in any vocation, you certainly look for excellence. I mean, if you're going to go see a cardiologist, you want to see the best cardiologist. So I think the same holds true now. Certainly the vocation's different, but data has always had the problem of bad data is bad data, garbage in, garbage out. We honestly, as an entity, as a world, we used to believe that big data would solve the problem. Well, it turned out big data is really kind of the source of the problem, right? Got to make sense. So and the numbers, the numbers out there, by the way, when we say big data, it always amazes me, again, depending on which study you want to subscribe to. Cisco had a report out that IoT was going to generate upwards of 800 zettabytes. And, that's a mind-numbing number, because, I'll put it in the context of something I understand. A gigabyte, I get a gigabyte, I understand that. Well, a zettabyte is 1 trillion gigabytes. And you start to realize the massive amounts of data. So I do think, obviously education, becomes a critical linchpin to unlock the benefit of big data. I think for years we've heard about STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. I think it's orders of magnitude probably more important that we think about that holistically for all individuals going through education. So I do think it's a matter of training. I think it's a matter of understanding. That's the other thing too, which we forget, is that for a lot of us, there's a lot of firsts here. Autonomous driving is going to be a first. Robotics, in many cases, is going to be a first. And so you can start to look at a lot of the firsts. I think the next generation, will feel much more confident and comfortable in working with technology, working with information, because it would have at least been seeded. And I think today that's the problem. It's exciting because there's so many firsts. I as a kid didn't have a cell phone. Generationally, that will never happen again, right? The next iteration of communication devices will always be present now. I can't imagine it going away. So I think, we're now probably one of the biggest challenges is just working through all the firsts, but it's also the most exciting.
Yeah, indeed. And when I look around and as we connect more and more devices, to the internet, I'm sure there's a finite amount of energy, that is available to us, at least at the moment. What do you think about the consumption part of the energy, and what do you think about the efficiency there?
So you touch on 2 points, I think, which is, one, that this notion of powering the internet, or the Internet of Things, and probably relatively recent, we've become more sensitized that this notion of always on isn't necessarily always needed. And so these devices have gotten much smarter. At first, I think a lot of the planning behind this, wasn't thinking about making these smart devices, but these truly have become devices that are intelligent. They're certainly well instrumented and connected. And so the point being is, I think when it comes to power management, they are much more attuned to that aspect. But the other side of the idea of energy, or if you think about our environment, clearly we're cautious because we don't have unlimited sources of energy. And even if we did, the byproduct has been challenging. We've seen the effects, globally on climate change. And so, we think a lot, candidly, we think a lot even about as we protect these devices. What are you protecting it with? Is it a green process? Is it sustainable? Throughout the manufacturing, throughout the use. What about during the disposal? Much of what we do with electronics gets incinerated at the end. Well, if you're not thinking about the products that go in when you incinerate, those products come out. And I know, so certainly for HCO and what we do when we think about protecting the Internet of Things, the guardian of sorts, is to think about sustainability, think about green, using materials that don't pollute, don't contribute to the problem that we have. So I think it is about consumption, but I also think it's about good corporate citizenship when it comes to all of these devices that are getting out there.
The more we connect, to some kind of power source, it means like we are burning somewhere, so
Exactly.
as soon as we burn something that has a direct contribution towards the climate change, and I guess somewhere we need to find a balance there on how we are protecting our environment together with investing on technology as such. And what's the future for your company?
So when we think about what HCO does, we're in a good place that we have a huge tailwind. We talked about the growth of electronics, and we talked about the growth of IoT. And, as more and more devices are presented to the market, more and more devices need to be protected. And, there is real science behind that protection, and the traditional ways that organizations would think about it. Normally to protect something, put in an enclosure and they put a seal around it, a mechanical seal, a gasket. We've all seen these things. Walk outside your house and look at your electrical box or your cable box, your internet provider communication. It's these boxes that are sealed. The problem is those seals don't hold up too well. And the more that device is serviced, the quicker they break down. And so, we saw the world advance, at least our world advance, to things that were more traditional in terms of coating types, urethanes and silicones and epoxies. And these things were okay. They were okay when there wasn't as much electronic. They were okay when electronics were relatively big. They were okay when weight didn't matter. But talk to an airline and ask them if weight matters. Of course it does. Talk to an auto manufacturer. Does weight matter? Absolutely. Well, you can't bulk these things up by putting all these heavy conformal coatings on it. So the combination of more electronics coming out, miniaturization, consideration for tighter tolerances, lighter devices, aesthetics, all really, present a strong win for us, a tailwind for us in terms of people adopting thin film type coating. So, we've had, record growth year on year, and it's a type of growth, honestly, more associated with software companies, and we clearly are a physical products company, and I think it has everything to do with the things I just described about the marketplace. And so we're very bullish about what the future looks like.
If I were to understand this correctly, the coating is not subjective to just the electronic device. It could be a car as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in fact, and we often, it's a really good point, because we really, started in consumer, in electronics, but we have advanced, into the medical field, automotive field, the industrial field, IoT in general. And even there, we start to see now our customers starting to look to apply these protective coatings to things other than electronics. And, you'd asked about this earlier, but they really do serve other purposes. They make for a great insulator. They prevent the transference of electrical signals. In many cases, they can provide a protection without trapping heat. So there's a lot of other applications that we're starting to see where organizations are asking about applying, these types of thin film. And it, in many ways, it's kind of like the insurance industry. Maybe it got started with, providing insurance for a home, and then extended to an auto, and extended to a business, and extended to life. And now there's lots of forms of insurance, like there is lots of forms and ways in which these thin films are starting to be applied.
Yeah, interesting, because I can imagine like it cannot be limited to one particular sector.
There's I would say there's early adopters, both within industry and within a particular application. Consumer electronics, I think, was out fast when it came to this for a variety of reasons. Number one is I think consumers have a relatively low tolerance when devices fail. And so just from a consumer satisfaction point of view, I think the adoption rate was much faster for consumer electronics to protect devices. If you go to buy a device today, you'll often see it, heavily promoted to be, splash resistant or water protected or waterproof. And so they clearly were an early adopter, I think, of the technology. In some markets, I think, it's really been a factor of regulatory considerations. So there may have been a desire, but it just takes time. Health, the healthcare industry is one where most devices, if not all devices, are basically rated. There's typically a rating system, class 1, 2, and 3 rating system for medical devices, depending on the particular rating. Depends on the particular level of testing and that has to occur. So it just by factor of the industry, I think, we've seen health devices maybe lag a bit, but I think they're quickly catching up. I think they're well down that path. And so I think, healthcare may be one of the biggest areas of growth that we experience. Automotive is another one, but it's not a regulatory issue. It's really a design cycle issue. Cars last a lot longer. The models don't change every year, right? In consumer, we get a new model pretty much every year. With cars, it's every 7, plus or minus. And so because of that, it takes a little bit longer for some technologies to cycle into the automotive sector. And so you'll start to see more and more applications, I think, within automotive, but that's really a byproduct of the design cycle. And then I think the industrial is a bit of a bit late. I think the industrial sector, when we start to think about oil and gas, refineries, upstream, downstream, we think about Factory 4.0, automation and machinery. They have been a little bit slower to adopt. And I think it's also an industry that has been, really, well embraced with mechanical devices. So, electronics is a relatively new phenomena to that industry. Where a lot of things that were never ever before connected are becoming connected. So I would tell you, when we see the industrial sector, really take off, we pretty much have pulled everybody through. We still see it in other industries. We see it in the marine space, in the agricultural space, and aviation, but those are, relatively smaller markets for electronics. So it's probably harder to characterize them. So consumers out in the lead. I think healthcare will probably be the next big burgeoning growth area for IoT. Automotive, no question, as we move from through the various levels of autonomous driving from L1 to L2 to L3 to L4 to L5. As we become fully autonomous, fully dependent upon a car, we're going to have to ensure that it's protected. And so that's what we see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can imagine. Due to this present situation, there's a lot of talk about telemedicine now. Previously people only used to talk a little bit here, a little bit there, but now there's a big subject there. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of devices, people will require to keep at home. And I'm sure there's a market for telemedicine.
No question. And I mean, we've seen, we've seen the commercials, we've seen, the numbers. Telemedicine pre-COVID was nascent at best.
Yeah, yeah.
Hundreds of thousands of sessions every day. I mean, it's crazy.
It was more of a novelty, right? So if you say, okay, I want to talk to a doctor today, and the doctor would find the time and then they just talk over the phone. Now it has become a compulsion because the doctor don't want to see you, right? If you're coughing. So
better yet, I don't want to go to the doctor and have someone else coughing.
Right. And if you have devices as such, which you are able to self-diagnose first of all, and then send the results to the doctor, then that's great, right? So
absolutely, and it's a great example of kind of some of the growth areas. These companies that are creating these kits that have the particular instruments that you can use at home, so the doctor can look down your throat or in your ears. They can take your blood pressure. They get your temperature. I mean, it's pretty incredible. And honestly, why would you go back? Of course, there's still reasons to physically be there, but generally speaking, if you become accustomed to telemedicine and you're comfortable, why wouldn't you continue it as long as it's applicable?
Yeah, unless there is a need for a physical, requirement, but otherwise, I think 90% of the time you don't need to actually visit a physician. And then that's pretty much all the question I had for this particular session. Thank you so much for this particular time. I definitely want to wish all the best for your company.
Well, Pramod, I will tell you, this has truly been enjoyable. One of the most enjoyable discussions I've had in a long time. Very thoughtful, and thank you for your time and the questions. And to you and the family, please stay healthy. And I seriously do look forward to hopefully having a chance to continue our conversation.
Thank you so much.